welcome to GCA, Anand.
Thank you, Rupali. Glad to be
Nice
here.
to have you here. Nice to have you here. And it is normally the situation that when people kind of take a session here, they're kind of well versed with the team and other members because quite a few meetings have already happened. But as you haven't been a part of the ecosystem, I guess, people would kind of need to know you like a little bit more before, kind of they know who they are kind of listening to really. So I had, of course, your full LinkedIn profile, which was kind of intense, but we are gonna cover like a brief about you just for the benefit of the audience for now and also for later. But I'll also encourage you to kind of have, a two-liner or on yourself once the mic is over to you.
Sure.
So what I have for the audience here, guys, we have Anand, and it's really prestigious to have him over here. He's a cybersecurity expert with, I guess, more than 3 decades of experience in security, storage, shaping enterprise software solutions. As of now, I guess since the takeover of the company that he was in by CrashPlan, he now is leading, I guess, a global organization, and I guess a lot of us are aware of CrashPlan as well. In his previous stints, he was also the managing director of McAfee. A lot of people know that name. And also the vice president of Commvault Global Product Development. And I guess, Anand, you also have some kind of inventions, on your side. So that'll be nice to kind of hear about like a little bit prior to the session. And here, of course, people have, come forward to get some insights into the ransomware in particular. But yeah, it'll be great to know a little bit about the inventions before you start with the ransomware session. Over to you.
Okay, great. Hey, Rupali, first off, thanks very much for that kind intro. And I'm, of course, excited to be here. It's always good to talk security with folks, who understand security. So it's always a pleasure. So I've been in enterprise software a long time, like Rupali observed. I've built, designed, sold enterprise solutions pretty much all my career. Both in storage and in the security domains. There are some patents to my name. Some of them with Commvault, some of them with Parablue. My most recent startup, which is now part of CrashPlan. The patents themselves are there's quite a lot of them, but they range all the way from the mid 90s to as recently as like a few years ago, and they're mostly in the storage domain, and having to do with fast data transfers, how you efficiently transfer large amounts of data over networks, virtualization, a number of different storage based aspects. So in any case, I hopefully we'll be able to have an interesting session today where hopefully you will learn a little bit from what I have to tell you, and maybe I will learn a little bit, from some of you. I'm sure there'll be questions. So with that, if we are good to get started, I'm happy to do that. Rupali, should we go ahead and do that?
Absolutely, Anand. Absolutely.
Okay, very good. I'm going to go ahead and share a small slide deck that I prepared in anticipation of the session. So give me a minute here to go ahead and do that. All right. I hope everyone's able to see my screen now.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, excellent. So anyway, as some of you might already know, I think Rupali mentioned it briefly. CrashPlan is a Minneapolis-based business that recently bought our startup, the startup that I created some years ago called Parablue. CrashPlan is an enterprise software vendor, and I serve currently as CTO at CrashPlan. CrashPlan is focused on building secure data resiliency solutions, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what data resiliency is, especially in the context of today's topic, and how it helps fight ransomware, etc. And as I'm covering this topic, I'm sure there will be questions that come up If you have a question, just hold on to it till the end. In the interest of time and to ensure that we keep the flow of the session uninterrupted, we'll collate all questions at the end and we'll answer them. At the end of the presentation. I understand there's going to be like a Q&A section. Now, really quick, just to kick things off, what is ransomware, right? And I'm sure most of you already know the answer. I know this is a pretty educated audience, but just for the interest, or in the interest of completeness, any discussion on cyber threats, I think most of you will agree today would be impossible without mentioning ransomware in some form or the other. As many of you might already know, it is a type of malware. It has been in existence for a long time, but it's really taken on a very visibly destructive form, possibly in the last 10 years or so. And it operates mainly by encrypting files on an infected computer, and then demands a Bitcoin ransom in return for the decryption key. That's typically how it works. Attacks can exploit a broad spectrum of vulnerabilities. Most commonly, you see people getting infected through a phishing email. That seems to be the easiest, most effective way that a lot of bad actors have found to be able to entice people. They're able to entice people to click on an innocent-looking email, usually with an attachment. That is what drops a deadly payload on the endpoint that the user is using, like a desktop or a laptop. The attackers in most of these cases, in all of these cases for the most part, they're faceless and nameless, right? There's really no opportunity to reason or negotiate with them. And in fact, the rise of cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, and having it become a medium, for financial transactions, has actually aided ransomware attackers because now they're able to do what they're doing and remain completely anonymous, right? So it makes their job easier. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but fun fact: the first ransomware attack happened, as far back as 1989. Of course, it was not called ransomware then. That was the first malware that was created by this guy. He was a biologist actually, and he created this. His name was Joseph Pop, and it was called the AIDS Trojan, or PC Cyborg. That's what it's called. And what he basically did is he distributed in a conference, these floppy diskettes, which were labeled AIDS information introductory diskettes. They were distributed to all the people who attended the conference to be like a form of a survey or something. So most people who took those floppies, put them into their computers and tried to respond to the survey, ended up infecting their machines. That was possibly the first known case, where ransomware actually infected, a large number of systems. Now the impact of ransomware has been growing, a lot ever since this first documented attack in '89. This is not even a complete timeline, as you guys can see. But the first really large-scale attack happened in 2011, and like I said, it kind of coincided with the use of anonymous payment services, and the fact that those services were gaining currency, which made it easier for ransomware authors, to collect money from their victims without revealing their identities. And just in the first 2 quarters of 2011, there were as many as 30,000 new samples that were detected, that is specifically were, targeted for disseminating ransomware. And after that point, I mean, there's really been no looking back. Since 2016, there have been several thousand ransomware attacks that occur every day. And the frequency has only increased each year. By last count, I'm not sure how reliable this is, but there is a ransomware attack attempted every 9 seconds. Right, so that's a lot of people, trying to attack businesses of all sizes all the time, and of course, some of them are successful. Right? How successful? Ransomware happens to account for close to 20% of all cybersecurity breaches worldwide, which is not small. Which is about 20%, is like a fifth of all cybersecurity incidents happen to be ransomware, and the threat is only growing bigger every year, as you can see. Now, what has made things a lot worse more recently is the rise of something called ransomware as a service, or RAS. RAS is a subscription-based model that enables malicious entities to use ready-to-use, ransomware toolkits, create their own ransomware and execute ransomware attacks. RAS gives pretty much anyone the ability to launch ransomware attacks just by signing up for the service, sometimes paying as little as $40 a month. These are easy to use. You don't have to be like a programming expert to do this. It doesn't need a lot of technical know-how. You can procure these, easily on the dark web, and they actually come with technical support, just like any other legitimate SaaS product, believe it or not. It's a pretty profitable venture for a lot of these hackers. It is estimated that total revenue could be as high as 100 billion. This new delivery model has made ransomware accessible at a very basic level to so many bad actors that it has taken the whole ransomware threat to a completely new level. A lot of people also think that ransomware attacks mainly servers. But the vector for the infection is usually a user's endpoint device. Like in almost any other case, the weakest link in the chain is usually a human. And if you're able to get past the human and fool them into thinking that they're interacting with or they're clicking on something legitimate, then the attacker has won. The vector many times tends to be a user's endpoint device, like a desktop or a laptop or a MacBook. Email is the most common attack vector used to deliver this type of malware. Spam emails, phishing emails, spear phishing emails. The attacks can be deadly. Ransomware can spread fast. May not give you a lot of time to react. The first thoughts around ransomware, usually from security experts, are around containment. You think about recovery later, but first you want to contain it. And most of the ransomware that is out there is reasonably smart, in the sense that it has evolved over time to be able to also defend itself. It can replicate and spread across a network. It can erase files on external drives connected to endpoints. It can infect backups if it can find them, because ransomware knows that backups are a great defense against it. So wherever possible, if it's able to find backups, it will destroy those, especially things like restore points on Windows, which can be used to recover old files. It'll go and destroy those. And in almost all cases, the infected computer, like I said, is an end user system. The damage caused by ransomware has continued to grow every year. When accounting for damage, one should really consider not just the cost of the ransom paid, because that can be a relatively small, piece of the total damage. You have to consider lost business, opportunity costs for new business, reputational damage, possible litigation and lawsuits, regulatory fines, cyber insurance premiums that go up. The costs add up, very rapidly, and it can be quite a lot. And this damage has increased almost exponentially year by year, and it's only expected to grow further as you extrapolate it into the next decade. And here's another interesting fact. Paying a ransom is really no guarantee of getting your data back. A significant percent of businesses that pay the ransom still don't get back all their data. What's worse, when you pay the ransom, you're essentially revealing to the attacker that you do not have any other defense or any other recourse, like a backup or anything else to go get your data back from. And a number of such businesses actually become victim to a second attack, usually within weeks, while they're still reeling, from the impact of the first one. The other interesting nuance here is the impact of a ransomware attack may not be just the loss of data and some of the other things that we said. It can also possibly affect a business's regulatory compliance. If you take a regulation like GDPR as an example, and you look at how GDPR defines a personal data breach, A personal data breach doesn't always have to be a theft of data. Even accidental destruction, loss, or alteration of data can qualify as a data breach. This means a ransomware attack can very easily compromise or can very easily qualify as a data breach because it can compromise an organization's stand on GDPR compliance. And it means the company will have to report this breach immediately. In most cases, companies have to report such breaches within 72 hours after becoming aware of it. Failure to do so could result in hefty penalties. So, in addition to dealing with the burden of an attacker or negotiating with an attacker and dealing with lost business, there is also the further pressure of managing a regulator, negative public relations, and all of that impact, due to the breach. So it can really mess up a small business. So one obvious solution a lot of people would think is, hey, why don't you just keep a copy of your data safe somewhere, like in the cloud, right? And some businesses do try to do this. I mean, they get a misguided sense of comfort because they have a copy of their data in the cloud, like in OneDrive. All my users are okay because they have their data in OneDrive or in Dropbox or Google. But file replication solutions like these are actually highly vulnerable to ransomware because the damage that ransomware will cause on their endpoints is pretty rapidly replicated to the cloud copy as well, right? So there's really no delay even. Both copies get corrupted almost right away. And while it is true that some of these solutions have file versioning capabilities, and it is technically possible to go back and retrieve older file versions, many don't have the option to perform a bulk restore. So some of them have recently started offering, solutions like, rewinding to an earlier point in time. But basically what that means is you're getting older data back, with the last several days of changes, being lost anyway. So not a great way to protect against ransomware. So how does one protect against ransomware? So now that we've talked about all the bad things about ransomware, so how does one go ahead and protect against ransomware? And at some level, it's not that different than how you protect yourself against other threats. If you think of what the NIST cybersecurity framework recommends, they talk about 5 critical functions that all organizations should perform, right? The first is to identify, what you have, what assets do you have. Then you take steps to protect those assets. You take steps to detect and look and alert for problems. And if you do find problems, be able to respond, be ready to act, be able to react, and then be able to recover. So once you've taken care of the problem, how do you come back to normal, right? How do you recover? What we usually see we see this in general with security, but definitely more so with ransomware, is there's a tendency from businesses to focus disproportionately on protect and detect, but not enough on respond and recover. And at least in my opinion, there has to be a lot more focus on the respond and recover elements as well. And I'm going to propose a thesis that's going to focus a lot more on basically respond and recover, because there is a lot of overdoing of protect and detect, but not enough of these. Now, if you look at a typical cybersecurity posture that's adopted by enterprises, it is generally based on a strategy that is called defense in depth. Basically, the idea is surround yourself with a layered and concentric defense while keeping your most valuable assets in the center. And what is your most valuable asset? It is your data. And the thesis I'm proposing here is that while all other forms of security are important, data security is the most critical. After all, it is your data that you're trying to protect. And that's where a strong cyber resiliency or a data resiliency strategy comes in. A data resiliency strategy allows your organization to bounce back from a disaster, not just recover, but recover as quickly as possible. And this is really important because the longer a business is down, especially a small business, the higher the chances that they are going to stay down and never be able to recover. And that is why it is so critical to be able to bring a small business back up and working in as short a time as possible, because you greatly increase the chances of them surviving. And that's where data resiliency comes in, as opposed to just data recovery. Recovery could mean anything. It could take months to recover your data. It may be too late. But resiliency is something that is supposed to bring you back up and running quickly. So what is a good data resiliency strategy then, right? And the first thing that is at the core of a strong data resiliency strategy is a strong backup solution. I mean, you should always, you still rely on a backup solution fundamentally to give you the recovery, elements of it. And then you try and make that strategy better by saying, okay, how can I make this recovery go a lot faster, right? And so here are a few things that a standard, backup solution that set a best-in-class backup solution apart from the rest of the field, and make it suitable for a data resiliency strategy. The first thing, the most important thing, is, can you seamlessly roll back in time? Can you restore your data from before the attack? What if I discover that I've been attacked only 2 days after the fact? Can I go back to a copy of my data from 48 hours ago and still recover it? This needs to be an essential feature of your data resiliency solution. Another really useful feature is something we call anomaly detection. Backups in general tend to get a really good look at all of your data every day. If the backup is able to find evidence of abnormal activity, like say a very large number of file deletions or a very high number of encrypted files, can it alert you? And if you're able to see that anomaly on a large number of systems on your network, you can be reasonably sure that you're seeing the beginnings of an attack. And also a good data resiliency solution should be able to protect your data from changes. So in other words, how do you make sure that ransomware is not able to come and corrupt your backup data as well, whether it is from unauthorized users or from malicious programs such as ransomware. And this is where some of the file replication solutions we talked about earlier, like Dropbox and OneDrive, fail to measure up because they are easily susceptible to ransomware attacks, where a good backup will keep the backup data insulated from external changes. And this property is called data immutability, and it's an essential feature of an enterprise-grade backup solution. And an interesting way, or an important way, a good backup solution will accomplish this is by creating what is called a gap in the data path, or a virtual air gap, we call it. So the idea is that ransomware should not be easily able to trace your backups from the sources. Like for instance, in cases where your backups are kept on the same network and are easily accessible from the source system, without any authentication barriers, right? So an air gap or a virtual air gap ensures that there is a series of technology barriers that need to be surmounted before the backup becomes accessible. For instance, have the backups, it's both physical and technological. So have the backups housed in an alternate building, in the cloud. Have a separate authentication mechanism to access those backups. That is different than how users authenticate into their systems, right? Just because a user's authentication is compromised doesn't necessarily mean their backups have to be compromised. Have a different authentication mechanism for that. So creating such a gap ensures that only the backup program is able to surmount this gap every time when it's required to, like being able to read or write data, but not other users or malicious programs such as ransomware, right? Now your backups may be immutable, but how do you make sure that your backups are safe? So can someone steal or breach data out of your backup? So maybe you've kept your source system safe, maybe your backups, are immutable, they can't be changed, but are your backups protected enough that they cannot be stolen? And that comes down to how backup data is stored. So if backups are stored securely using strong encryption, that's a plus. But extra marks if the application can also do what is called data shredding or digital shredding. Digital shredding essentially takes each object or each file and decomposes it into smaller pieces. encrypting each piece separately. Basically, it creates a digital jigsaw that nobody can make sense out of. So, and this prevents data exfiltration. So even if somebody gains access to a business's data backups, they would not be able to make any sense out of it. And the software will obviously have the ability to decrypt and reassemble the data when an authorized user, who's been duly authenticated, requests it. So these are some of the things to look for in a good backup or data resiliency solution. One other thing is also, when you manage a ransomware attack, it's much more involved than simply recovering your data or recovering it quickly. You also need to find the root cause of the infection, right? You want to plug that vulnerability that let the attack come in the first place. And this process is usually called incident management, which involves like forensic investigation into the events that occurred. And this is going to need to happen even as the business is struggling to get their high value users back in action. They're trying to restore their data from their backups. And during the incident management process, it is possible that infected systems and the original payload that caused the infection, you may need to isolate them. And such systems and files should not automatically come back into the network. Such systems should not be let back into the network. Such files should not be able to come back from a backup, as part of a restore attempt. And there are advanced solutions, backup solutions that will have features like device quarantining and file quarantining that will help to isolate and segregate, suspicious systems or suspicious data until such time incident management is complete. So these are some of the things to look for in a good data resiliency strategy. So to sum things up, the frequency of ransomware attacks has gone up exponentially. There's literally an attack every 9 seconds. By some estimates, there could be an attack every 2 seconds by 2031. Almost 20% of all malware attacks worldwide are ransomware attacks. About 70% of organizations have been impacted in one way or the other. Many of these attacks use phishing. Huge numbers of spam emails are sent and received every day. Huge numbers of enterprises, almost 40% of enterprises have had to lay off employees after an attack. And many of them had to stop operations or at least suspend operations temporarily. And a lot of small businesses, the ransomware is hardest on small businesses. 60% of small businesses simply go out of business, after a cyber attack. If there's a couple of things I'd like to have the audience take away from today's session, it's this. In the worst cases, disruption due to an attack can take months to resolve. But organizations that are more prepared with backups experience far less downtime. The average lost time for them is 6 days, and that makes the difference between just data recovery and data resiliency. And if you're really well prepared and you have the right tools, you might be able to be back in business in just a day or two also, and you don't have to negotiate with the attacker. So that about sums up what I had to say. I'll close with this. A common saying in the security industry is that a breach is not a question of if, it's really a question of when. A lot of businesses still falsely believe that these attacks only happen to someone else, but every one of us is vulnerable, and it is only a matter of time before you become the next target. Preparation is key. Data security is critical. Like they say, most businesses don't plan to fail, they just fail to plan. So that is about what I had to say today. So I'm happy to stop here and take questions.
Thanks, Anand. That was awesome. And even I had something new to learn today. We have quite a few people here. Somebody who'd already kind of put in a request for a question, Anil. He's a dear colleague of ours, also a member of the GCA committee on GRC. Anil comes from Intel. Anil, would you want to take the question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rupali. Hi, Anand. Thanks for a very insightful session. So my name is Anil. I work as an architect at Intel, overseeing GRC, data privacy, and AI governance.
Yep.
I think you covered pretty much everything that an organization from a ransomware standpoint, really worries day in, day out. So one thing that we are really facing challenge even now, and which I would need your insights, or like two things, right? One is limited visibility, especially you have shadow IT where employees install third-party softwares, though we kind of try to enforce, but we can't enforce everyone to not use third-party software, right? That is where we see a challenge. We've been gone through some incidents in the past. We try to enforce, but still we cannot completely control from employees using third-party softwares, right? That is one point, and especially with this remote working, right? The endpoint monitoring is getting really difficult because you have people connecting from mobile devices, their iPads, their personal laptops, especially to a certain object from an enterprise standpoint. That is one thing. And very importantly, supply chain. We work with close to 200k suppliers within Intel. And suppliers bring in a different dimension of risk to Intel. I think these are some of the common things that I've seen in my day-to-day thing. I just want to understand what is your perspective. And my second question is, how is AI going to disrupt the ransomware ecosystem? So there could be some proactive tools that could do the job, but I don't see there is anything at this point of time which can really be very proactive. But what is your perspective on how AI can both in terms of protecting the organization and harming the organization can bring in that change in the ecosystem?
Yeah. No, those are all great questions. I wish I had great answers. But they're all good questions without really very good answers. But I'll try and take a crack at as much as possible. I mean, the issue that you bring up with endpoints is something that all organizations face, and I believe they all try to solve them in different ways. I know organizations that try to lock down their laptops and ensure there's only approved programs that can run on them. They have DLP, and they have all kinds of other software to ensure that nothing unauthorized runs, nothing unauthorized leaves the computer, etc. There are security mechanisms that ensure that even when you sign into a SaaS, you cannot do it from a personal laptop. It has to be an authenticated system, not just an authenticated user. It has to be an authenticated machine, that is allowed, and so on. So there are ways to try and limit some of the damage that you talked about. But you're also right that if you're dealing with third parties and you're dealing with suppliers, you don't control their IT rules, their IT systems. The best you can do is when they join your network, do a quick verification, like a network access control, type of thing, to see if they have basic levels of security software installed on their machines. But that's like a very, very basic check. The one thing I always still believe is an important tool, and that organizations need to fall back on more, is actually security training, is actually helping employees understand the importance of following these rules. I know that's a tall ask, but I believe if you do it often, and if you do it with intent, it does have an impact, because at the end of the day, the only thing that stands between you and a really massive breach is not really millions of dollars of security software. It's really a person who can either do the right thing or the wrong thing with an email they receive. So it actually does come down to that. I think training is something that people don't talk about as much, but we should in all of these sessions. Honestly, is that that should be one of the tools that you list, and ensure that people are trained. As far as AI, to be honest, I'm with you in the sense that I haven't seen any any tools that will necessarily make things easier. Although I've heard AI has made it easier sometimes for the bad guys to be able to write better tools to attack. I remain hopeful. I mean, AI has a lot of promise. I'm not sure I have a good answer for you right now on how AI would specifically help in the case of a ransomware attack, but I think there is promise, and there are things that we probably can anticipate in the future. I mean, AI surprises me every day in ways it is solving problems that I had not anticipated. So there is, I think there's a lot of hope there.
No, I totally agree with you, Anand, and that gives me confidence that we're all like trying to like work on the similar kind of problem statement across the world.
Yeah, the problems that you mentioned are, the same things I've seen in a lot of organizations. I mean, a lot of our customers, tell me about the same problems, that they face. So it's you're not alone.
Yeah. And you're right. I think we're trying to like invest a lot on the awareness campaigns.
Yes.
One last thing, right? I've read a lot. I've heard a lot about zero trust architecture can solve a lot of problem, but I don't know how zero trust architecture or implementations can really solve the ransomware problem. But I'm just like trying to understand what is your perspective on the zero trust architecture? What do you think it can bring to the table especially from the ransomware standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, I think zero trust is essentially it's a great defense, right? I mean, obviously it doesn't. I didn't talk about a lot about that today because I was very focused on the response and recovery portions. But zero trust is, in my opinion, a critical way of being able to protect yourself from attacks. Because if you, Anil, if you think of the old way, let us say 15, 20 years ago, there was this over-reliance on firewalls for everything, right?
Yeah.
And firewalls basically had a very simple notion. Anything outside is not trusted. Anything inside is trusted. So the moment you are able to get inside a network, in the olden days, you pretty much had free run on everything, right, in the organization. And essentially, I mean, you probably know the story and the history behind this, but zero trust came about because of an initiative at Google, right? Because when Google was hacked, they decided to respond and essentially, fix up their networks, to make sure this doesn't happen again. And zero trust was born out of that effort. But essentially, zero trust does a couple of things, right? First, it basically says, don't trust anybody, like question everything, right? So it doesn't matter if you're inside or outside. If you have penetrated, even if you're inside my firewall, if you're seeking access to a resource, I'm going to ask and authenticate you. I'm going to ask you who you are, why do you need access to the resource, and do you really need this much access, right? So essentially, that's basically what zero trust calls microsegmentation. So it ensures that you're asked a question every time. I mean, one example I like to give people is, it's like coming into an office building, right, and being able to have access to all the conference rooms, versus if all the conference rooms are closed and you had to like use your badge to authenticate yourself into each room, right? I mean, that would be the difference, right? So in a zero trust architecture, it's like all the rooms are closed and you may not have access to all the rooms, but you would have to authenticate yourself into each room. So that's one thing. The second thing is it allows you to have a common identity manager. So there's a single source of truth to everything. So you can't authenticate in different ways. Sometimes I'll authenticate with a password. Sometimes, I'll use a biometric. I mean, it's not like that. I mean, there's a single identity manager that decides who you are, what your role is, and what rights you have to play. I think, short answer, I think zero trust has made security a lot stronger, and it is an absolutely important defense to have. So there's no two ways about it. Yeah.
Okay.
I can help you across everything, right, Anil? I mean, ransomware is just another. It's an attack. It's also exploiting a vulnerability to come in, and the zero trust will help you. There.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah. So thank you very much, Anand. It was really Good conversation.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Anil. Thanks, Anand. With what you said, Anand, two things kind of came to my mind. With so much talk going on in terms of lack of training, awareness, I think a lot of people in sitting in the board must have to realize that cybersecurity is now just not to be seen by the CISOs or CTOs. It's also a matter of the HR. It must kind of stitch in very well in terms of how do you really define not just who does what as a part of ZTNA, but also, do you know how to do what you're allowed to do? Like, for example, even when, you go to, let's say, the board of directors or the CXOs, people get offended if you tell them, hey, you don't have access to doing this. And just that in itself, becomes a matter of, sometimes not wanting to disrespect somebody. So you actually go ahead and give all the rights to somebody who's at a certain level and beyond. And those people, unfortunately, are more vulnerable or making the organization more vulnerable because they're actually the ones which are sharing their passwords and login credentials with other people, vis-a-vis somebody who'd be like an accounts guy who has to make payments. He's going to keep his password rather secure. Yeah. But these guys would actually have their secretaries and, the proxies doing all of that. And just because, they kind of attach this to a lot of shall I say, pride or prestige or what have you, they want all the access. And, we've talked to so many HR people. They said, hey, ZTNA, great when it comes to, the technology part of it, but how do you implement it? How do you tell somebody, hey, you can't do this? That's our biggest problem. And so I think a little bit, because you've been like a founder and now, with the exposure in Crash Plan as well as a CTO, how do you see that a cultural shift is probably going to be the next big focus on cybersecurity, not just from a point of social engineering training, phishing training, and training in terms of the regulatory affairs and what have you, but also in terms of sensitizing people as to it's not just about, your position. It's about really, keeping your organizations secure, and you being a senior guy is actually, more responsible to demonstrate as an example that, hey, listen, I don't have any access as a CTO or a CIO or a director. So I would absolutely encourage people to kind of only take the access as much required. So over to you.
No, absolutely. I think that is, like you said rightly, it's more a cultural battle to fight, not a technology battle. And I think one thing, one language that a lot of the senior folks, the C-level folks will understand is economics, is finance, right? I mean, they may not understand technology, but they understand money. And I think if there is one good thing about the publicity ransomware has received, it has made it widely known how much it can impact a business, how it can cause losses. So many of these executives are now aware at some level of the other, what has happened in the industry, what has happened to even some of their own competition, people in the same segment or the same vertical. I mean, I can tell you this, Rupali, just in the last, I would say 5 or 10 years that we've been in business, and a lot of our customers are also customers in India. And some of these are, family held businesses, I mean, not without mentioning names, large businesses that are not public, these are closely family held businesses. But you'll be surprised at, how security sensitive or aware their teams have become, over time, because they see it not only as a matter of defense, they also see it as a competitive advantage to have these measures in place. They use them as ways to tout how they are better than others in competitively in their segment, etc. So I think a lot comes down to the security executive, whoever is in the organization, how influential they are, how good of a story they can tell, how well they can make the argument, usually in financial terms, to their CEO or to their board, and help them understand in a language that they appreciate, why this is important. It's certainly possible, and I've actually seen that change over the last few years. I'm not saying the problem doesn't exist. It certainly does, but I'm seeing it get better.
Yeah, no, thanks for kind of mentioning that. But, I'll just kind of leave in a last comment that I'd spoken to one of these CISOs. He said, when you go to the top management with a budget, they're very happy approving a budget if you're buying like a Gartner Quadrant 4 product or a service, you're buying a Sentinel-1 or what have you, you have an approval on the budget. But if you say, hey, I need, expert, trainers on cybersecurity to actually conduct workshops for senior guys, and then they're like, number one, they don't have budget for those kind of training, and number two, the big guys don't have time for attending those kind of training sessions. So, it's easy for them, number one, to kind of pitch in a world-class product or a service, and at the same time, unfortunately, the way it is, even the product companies and service companies, they seldom say that, hey, it's actually your people, which are making you vulnerable. They say, hey, you put my product and you're good, so not everybody tells because they want to sell their products,
No, that's a really good point. And that's what I was saying earlier too, is not enough people talk about how important security training is, because and it has to be done frequently too, because there's a sense of recency. People forget things after a while. I've also noticed that when you tell somebody, you show them examples of phishing emails, and more recently, I'm sure some of you have seen this. There have been these like WhatsApp type of attacks where somebody will email or WhatsApp an employee and say and essentially impersonate the CEO and say, I'd like you to go get some Amazon gift cards, and things of that sort.
Yeah.
Now, when you show these examples to employees, and we do that occasionally, when we do an all hands, and you'll notice that for a period of time, after that, people are actually super careful because they are thinking about it. So it has to be, it not only has to be done, it has to be done frequently, and people, you have to refresh these lessons, and you have to keep it interesting. Obviously, you lose attention span otherwise. So it is a challenge, Rupali, and you're right. It's probably not sufficiently addressed, but I'm seeing things get better. I remain optimistic. They're definitely not getting worse, at least on that front.
Yeah, interesting. So one, just to kind of mention, one company that I know before, they have an LMS way of training people, and they continuously, kind of demonstrate to people, hey, today you have like a 40% people clicking on a phishing link, and again they do an iterative training after about 2-3 months, and then I'll say, hey, it's come down to like 20, and then 10, and then 5, and then, but to your point, it still has to be done continuously, because people are moving out and in, and so new people must get trained. People who kind of were trained earlier must be trained on new kind of phishing strategies, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I guess my takeaway is training. Yeah, big takeaway.
Yes, I agree.
All right. So I think that's really it from my side. I think I kind of took quite a few minutes, but if anybody else wants to ask question, we still have 10 minutes before we close the session, unless there's no other question, and we can end the session right now. So anybody, they can unmute themselves and ask a question if they have.
Okay. Hey, Anand, Arvind this side.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, you've been in this industry, the security industry, for 3 decades long, and have you seen any interesting, more in real time from your own experience or from far away? Have you seen any interesting ransomware incidents?
There have been ransomware incidents that we ourselves have seen with some of our customers, and we've helped recover for them. Honestly, many customers don't like to talk about it. It's even though you read about some of these attacks, etc. A lot of times companies are shy to talk about it. because they feel like it reflects badly, on their, on their policies and on their defenses, etc. So there have been, right, and some attacks have been very difficult to recover from, where people have toiled away, for months, to come back to normal. And in some cases, our involvement was fairly superficial, in the sense that they really needed us to help with a very specific portion, of what they needed to recover. So it depends, on the customer. But yeah, I mean, we have had first-hand experience with several times with people getting attacked. Yeah.
Anand, if I can add, right, with my tenure at RSA, I've seen an attack I think this was a public news, that they got hold of the algorithm that was used for the secure code, where you go and get a. So during that time, I think we were almost like, there was a special task force that was set up. Almost for a week, we weren't let. We were in office, locked down. We could not even call anybody outside of thing, and that was a big incident that I've seen in my experience being in the security industry.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that a number of our large customers. Of course, I'm going to be careful not to name anyone, but I mean, we've seen, how they've had to react, and and they've called us in to help. I know scenarios where, just like you said, Anil, where people were locked down. There was one lady who essentially she just collapsed out of exhaustion. For the period that she had to be there, they had to rush her to the hospital. Yeah, I mean, I've seen incidents like that. Yeah,
because I think from a reputation standpoint, it is a big thing for any organization, because once you get that reputation that you have been attacked, whatever way it could be, ransomware or malware, phishing attack, anything of sort of, people
don't sign up.
Exactly, they lose trust.
They just vanish. Yeah, I mean, it can be quite hurtful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's true.
And the first poor thing, it could be a CISO, maybe even having losing a job, if you were to report like
a CISO is the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Hey, one more last point. That's really interesting. We had this awareness, in terms of how an organization must be structured. Just leaving this last point with you, Anand, and Anil as well there. Unfortunately, the CISOs and a lot of other companies who have head of cybersecurity, they did not have exposure to cybersecurity issues in their career span, right? Yeah. They're not trained cybersecurity guys. They are typically the network infrastructure, or the guys who dealt with servers and availability of the internet infrastructure, the LANs and WANs of the world. But most of these people, shouldn't have been fired, and therefore they weren't, which is rightfully so. But they also had to additionally manage the cybersecurity. Now, to somebody, who has been there in IT industry for 20 years, leading like a large organization in terms of his, it's IT operations or, general IT infrastructure, for that guy to say, hey, I don't know cybersecurity, therefore I'm putting in my papers, that's not normal, right? At the same time, for the organization to say that, hi, because you're now, also having to look at cybersecurity, we must empower you, enrich, the organization structure in a manner that there are enough cybersecurity people reporting into you, right? That is also not happening. So, there's a little bit of fear, for somebody to go ahead to the management, say that, hey, I can't do it, number one. And also for the management to say that, hey, we know you can't do it because you're not exposed to cybersecurity issues earlier. Therefore, we are here to enrich, your department. So, there's a very difficult situation there, when people want to protect their organization, but nobody would give them additional budget to hire more people. They themselves don't know it, but how do they admit it? I mean, it's kind of weird. Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, and even the reporting structures, especially for security personnel, CISOs, I feel it's still not optimal. There's still a lot of lip service paid to. There is a chief security officer. and the board will hear directly from them, etc. But in reality, they don't control the purse strings. They might report to a CIO. Many times they might report to a CFO, who may not understand the nuances of security at all. And a lot of times the logic that comes down, especially when you're making budget decisions and things like that, is, well, you didn't have this tool all these years and nothing happened, so why do you think we have to buy it now, right? I mean, it's flawed logic, but that is how unfortunately decisions get made. And again, unless you have a very strong person in that role, with conviction, who's able to make the case and make the argument, it's an uphill battle. It remains an uphill battle. I agree.
And even if you kind of have newer people coming with cybersecurity degree, I mean, it takes time for them to have 10 years, 15 years experience. How do you become a senior guy in a company right away? Anyway, I think somebody had to speak.
Yeah.
No, it was me, Rupali. So, and Anand can come in on this. From my perspective, right? Not, yes, having an incident in your organization is bad, but not all the incidents will kind of lead to targeting the CISO, right? So, where the CISO will play a major role is how quickly you can recover from the incident, how quickly you can do an RCA, and very importantly, understand what is the amount of compromise in terms of monetary and non-monetary thing that has been compromised with those incidents that has been happened. I think if you are like on top of it quickly, as soon as possible, very quickly, I think you would really gain the respect from your CTOs or CIOs or CEOs. So I think that is where the maturity lies from an CISO standpoint. Because you're right, not all CISOs understand all the different perimeters of security, but trying to work with the people who have that expertise, trying to understand what went wrong, and trying to know what is the compromise that this happened, and then regaining the situation as quickly as possible is where the challenge lies.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So thank you so much. I think we are just about, closing on time, 4:58. Anand, really happy to have you. And I'm sure with people now having, heard you, I'm sure they'd look forward to more sessions, maybe on some different topics and more experience of yours going forward, even with Crash Plan. So yeah, I think that's really from my side. It was a lovely session, and I'm kind of hoping that the consumption of the content will continue even after the live session is over, and many of them should benefit. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Great questions, Anil, Rupali, everyone else. Thanks so much.